Hi, folks. Whoops, that's a bit loud up there, isn't it? We'll try back here. Okay. Right, we have question time now, Q&A. So if anybody's got any questions, please raise your hand. And we've got a couple of runners here with microphones. Thank you very much, folks. And you can ask questions of the panel. We've got an extra person on the panel, which is the amazing Kelly, and she'll answer some questions for you if you have any for Kelly. Thank you very much. Just pass this one.
Thanks for such a wonderful afternoon. I just wondered, I don't have MS, but I just wondered if somebody thought they did, how would they get diagnosed in Taranaki, New Plymouth?
Kia ora. Thank you. So in Taranaki, the general process, from my understanding, is that if someone has some symptoms or a significant attack will generally go to hospital and then do the ruling out process from there with tests for what's going on. But otherwise, it would sit with their GP. So they might go to their GP and explain what's going on. And then from there, the GP might do some tests and refer into neurology or to an eye specialist if they've got eye symptoms going on. So generally it comes from your GP. If not, and you end up in hospital, then it will come through the hospital system. And do we have a neurologist in Taranaki? We have visiting neurologists, so we don't have a based neurologist. Our neurologists, 3 of them come in from outside of Taranaki, and they cover all neurology.
Just to, and Benson might want to comment, but to be diagnosed with MS, you must be diagnosed with an MRI. So that's there will be symptoms and other things, but the final diagnosis, I think I'm right in saying, Benson, must be by way of an MRI.
Yeah, absolutely. So the key thing is really the symptoms. If you're worried about, if you've got symptoms and you're worried about MS, or you know someone who has symptoms and you think that they have MS, usually I think the first port of call is to see your GP, express concerns about the symptoms. But ultimately, people end up needing to get an MRI to make that diagnosis. It's almost impossible to have symptoms without MRI changes and be labelled with the diagnosis of MS.
And another thing, please, we always tell people, if you know anybody with MS that hasn't made contact with your MS organisation, like MS Taranaki, please ask them to do it, whether they live in Taranaki or whether they live in wherever. We can help. There's a whole range of things we can, strategies we can help them with and direct them to be able to live their life better. And it's a fact. Cheers. Yeah, while we're bringing the microphone, Brett Drummond is still online and he can answer questions if we have any more questions for Brett. Thank you, Brett.
Hi, I'm Anna. I've got MS. I'm just wondering, what's the balance of evidence for established therapies for MS versus the some of the evolving clinical trials like CAR T therapy and for stem cell?
Yeah, so the established treatments that we have available have a lot of strong evidence for them. And not only that, we've also got real world evidence, from 15, 20 years of people internationally who've been taking, these sorts of medications. And the point that Neil sort of brought up earlier this morning about, sort of studies like MS base, which is why we really like people to participate in international registries where we can actually see, the clinical trials say that this happens, but what actually happens, 15, 20 years later on, someone who's had treatment. But back to your other question about, how do they stack up against new and emerging therapies? I think the sort of shift I think in terms of the treatments that people have mainly focused on in terms of research and clinical trials have really been looking at that active inflammatory component of multiple sclerosis. And now that we've got sort of better understanding about which components of the immune system we think might be specifically involved involved with MS, this is where the newer emerging therapies start to appear, because rather than trying to target all these parts of the immune system, we can just try and focus on a specific area. And what that basically means, potentially, better efficacy, so more of a better treatment effect, but at the same time trying to limit those side effects that are there. But until these trials have been completed, essentially we still fall back on the tried and tested therapies that we do have available.
Thank you, Benson. I know that Brett doesn't like to follow Benson, but Brett, you might like to have a comment following that.
Yeah, I mean, again, Benson just does the perfect job of doing it, so got my audio coming through? Yeah, I mean, I think I completely agree with everything that Benson says there. Obviously, we need data to come through to understand how some of these new things, especially something like CAR T cell therapy, there's a lot of interest in that and a lot of excitement, but we are very early stages in terms of that therapy from an MS perspective. Probably the ones that we've got a little bit more on at the moment are the BTK inhibitors, and we've seen some exciting results coming out of phase 3 clinical trials in that in terms of their potential to target a different disease process to the inflammatory activity that Benson was talking about, and possibly that they're starting to target some of the neurodegenerative components, the PIRA you may have heard of, progression independent of relapse activity. But yeah, I think, at the moment we go with what we know, and we've got a lot of exciting or long-term data on those, but there's certainly things on the horizon that I think we can be interested and excited about hearing in years to come.
Thanks, Brett.
He took the words straight out of my mouth.
Any more questions, folks? Thank you.
Thank you, Ruby. It's okay. Mum's going to talk and don't be embarrassed. Thank you. I learnt recently, related to demyelination, that some children or adults can develop ADHD post a attack. What if a child already has ADHD and has MOGAD or MS? What does that mean for their neurological development?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question, and I guess we're sort of beginning to recognise that there's a spectrum of ways that our brain works and thinks, and sort of diagnostic criteria for things like autism spectrum disorders, ADHD. It's really evolving. I don't think there's a lot of great evidence to indicate that there may or may not be a relationship or association between, inflammatory disorders of the central nervous system and conditions like ADHD, but I think it's more of a watch this space kind of thing. I guess theoretically you might sort of consider that if there's a particular part of the brain that's involved, that may lead to a certain pattern or set of behaviours, but I think we don't really have enough evidence to sort of argue either way. Certainly in terms of personal experience, I don't really see that much of a association or connection.
I just wondered, whereabouts do most of the clinical trials take place?
So in New Zealand, we've got, I think, 3 or 4 main centres that are really involved with clinical trials. Historically, a lot of the clinical trials were done in Auckland. Ernie Willoughby was running a very productive unit for clinical trials. I know Deborah Mason, who's based in Christchurch, also has a big active clinical trials unit there. Otherwise, at the moment, I think in New Zealand, I'm running a couple of clinical trials in Auckland. Debbie's doing stuff in Christchurch. I think the team down in Dunedin trying to set up a unit there. The team in Waikato have also been quite successful participating in clinical trials. But at the same time, I don't think that it means that, if you're not in those centres that you shouldn't participate. A lot of the clinical trials, particularly if they're industry sponsored, so the drug company wants to run a particular trial, there'll be funding for, potential participants to travel to the study sites. Also, thinking about, slightly different ways of of doing those studies as well. Having patients assessed remotely so they don't necessarily need to go into a big centre. A lot of clinical trials internationally are looking at how can we increase participation, because a lot of the treatments that we're testing at the moment potentially could be game changers, but because we don't have access to them in New Zealand because either they haven't been approved yet or they're not funded by Pharmac, I think participation in clinical trials is such a huge and important thing. And, I think keeping up with, societies like MS Taranaki, MS New Zealand, looking at sort of the resources available, including through NZ, MS Research Trust, there's a lot of information about clinical trials and where things may be happening. And even if the information on the website, says that they're recruiting people from a certain area, I don't think there's any, harm, or I don't think it's wrong to sort of approach whoever's advertising the study to say, hey, I'm from this particular area, could I be considered for the trial as well? For a lot of the clinical trials that we're conducting in New Zealand, often they're multi-centre studies. So in other words, we're not the main people that sort of set up the clinical trial or have the idea to run the clinical trial. We're just participating as a study site involving several sites around the world. And so we're always looking for participants. And I think the best thing that people can do is advocate for themselves and sort of inquire and also reach out. And if you see something on a website that you think, oh, actually that might be for me, I don't know necessarily, if I would qualify or if I'm in the right place, I think just reach out anyway. We're always very, very keen for people to be involved and looking for, slightly different ways of getting people involved, even if it's, we're looking for people in the Auckland region, potentially if community organisations or research trusts or, the Lotteries Board are able to support people and fund them so you can fly up to Auckland, and come and do your study visit every 6 months. I think that's a great thing.
Now, before we go to another question, I've just got to say, in relation to Jeremy's presentation, the adaptive equipment that we've managed to get into the gym was funded by the Toy Foundation and also of Taranaki, and also I've got to say that that a lot of the fees that we're able to dodge for people attending the gym, that's through the Taranaki Foundation. So we have amazing support in Taranaki, we really do. And once again, our success is all about relationships and awareness. And thank you folks for being here.
Oh, sorry. Daydreaming.
My question is a two-part question. In the last 20 years, has the number of cases of MS grown in this country? And B, have the environmental factors been looked into it to say it's environmental, or is it just a natural progression of population?
The most accurate number of people with MS was in the 2006 prevalence study. We've since, we being the Research Trust and MS New Zealand, have funded a study out of the Compass group of Auckland University, which uses a thing called the IDI, the Integrated Data Infrastructure, which is run by the Department of Statistics. It's actually going to be how they do the census in the future. And they have all sorts of government databases like Inland Revenue, the Hospital Discharge Database, Pharmac, etc. And they've identified about 5,700 people, so up from 4,300 2006, who have apparently or appear to have had interventions with government agencies with a diagnosis of MS. The only problem with the numbers, there are about 700 of those people that are shown in the database as having had an intervention with MS, but haven't had any further intervention for the last 15 years. And some of us are really suspicious that somebody that may have had a diagnosis of MS 15 years ago and had no further intervention. So there are at least 5,000 people in New Zealand with MS at the present time, but the exact number still remains quite difficult to challenge. The most accurate regional database is in Waikato, using the MS database, and interestingly, they show about 300 less people with MS than the integrated database work that Compass has done. So if you're interested in the census, I'd be worried, quite frankly, because I don't think it's nearly as accurate as some current ministers would like you to think it is.
Yeah, you may recall from Prue's talk that she said she was born in Dunedin. There is a latitudinal gradient, especially across the world, and very notable in New Zealand, that people born closer to each of the poles are and further away from the equator are more likely to be diagnosed with MS. I mean, for the Norwegian, the Scandinavian countries have high incidence, and also Canada has pretty high incidence. And I think it might be Norway with a very similar population to us, where we have 5,000. They have something like 11,000 people diagnosed for not much more population. Just a wee point to note. Okay, was that it for questions, folks, or anybody else? Excellent. Oops, no, we've got one more. Hi, Jean.
Okay, Jean Hasty can never ever help herself. On behalf of everybody here and our New Plymouth Stroke Support Trust and all our backyarders, shall I call us, in the backyard, thank you very, very much, Kelly, Graham and all your team for inviting us to come along, and for this presentation today. It has been really worthwhile, and I'd like you all to put your hands together for a big thank you for MS.
Thank you. The very last thing is, look, folks, if you've got takeaways from today that are positive and you're able to drop us a line and let us know. We've mentioned grant funding. All those little notes really go to help when we put in grant funding applications. Cheers, folks. Oh, hey, look, somebody's holding up a bucket at the other end of the room. If you've got a donation as you go out, we won't say no. Thank you, folks. Thanks for attending. Oh, one moment before we close. Sorry, Kelly. Kelly has some presentations to our guest speakers. Thank you, Kelly.
You want to do it?
No, you do it, Kelly. You do it, please.
Order. So we just want to wrap this up with some presentations to our guest speakers. Thank you all for coming again. We'll borrow another 5 minutes of your time, and if we could we have 2 vice chairs on our committee. We have Paul and Michelle. So we'll start with, who shall I start with? We'll start with Neil. Anyone, because they're all the same. So Michelle, come up, Michelle, yeah. Thank you, Neil. And thank you, Erin, for coming along. And our next one will be to Hanneke. Thank you for coming, Hanneke. It's been lovely to meet you again. Thank you. And then we might as well do Jeremy. Jeremy, all the way from New Plymouth. Thank you. And then we'll move on to Prue. Thank you for such a passionate, inspirational kōrero today. We loved it. It's good to keep it real. Thank you, Paul. And then we have our awesome Dr. Benson Chen. We shared dinner last night, and he was like, me and him are like, oh, we're going to take some of that back to the room. But it wouldn't fit in a Soviet, would it, Benson? So thank you.
Excellent.
And then last and finally, we have Julie. Julie, with her and Graham.
Not quite.
Thank you.
Yep.
So thank you all for coming today.
Yeah, and we have one last presentation, and that is we have a presentation to Kelly. We have a bunch of flowers from Simply Blooming. That's donated by Simply Blooming. You are amazing, Kelly. Thank you very much for attending, folks. We really appreciate it. It's been magic. Cheers. And we've got another.